everybody. This is Craig from the Pacific War Channel. Welcome back to Echoes of War. I'm joined here by my co-host, Gaurav. How are you?
Hey Greg, wonderful to be back here. And I know to our audience, basis like how we have released the episodes, we are taking a detour in series, but we did give a hint of it in our previous episode. And yep, this is going to be a pretty interesting series that is starting now.
And we have a guest here to help us along this journey. Simon, how are you?
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here again. Yeah, let's have some fun with history.
Simon,
yes.
It's good to have you back. I think the last time you did join us was for the naval arms race and the Battle of Jutland. So looking forward to this series with you as well.
And I mean, everyone's probably already read the title of this one. It's going to be something along the lines as, prelude to World War Zero or beginning of the 7 Years' War. It's definitely a crowd pleaser to say the least. But before we jump into it, if you've not joined us on YouTube, please consider doing so, as we're going to be tossing up, I think each of us has more than 20 tabs open on our Chromes each, maps, portraits, and whatnot, to try and give this more of a visual, feel to it, more of a documentary look. And of course, if you like to further support the channel, consider checking out the YouTube membership or the Patreon account at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War Channel. By joining either of these, you get access to the exclusive podcast series, which is 32 episodes and ongoing, I think, by this point. You get early access to all the content I make and voting rights to the subjects I will tackle next. But stating all of that, I guess let's just jump right into it.
Yeah. One moment. I think I need to bring up maybe we should start with what the hell happened with the Elector of Brandenburg. I'm going to call that out. So perhaps, Simon, you could take us through while I just bring up an image. And for the audience, please pardon this. I have way too many tabs open. God, this is I really need to find a way to maybe
organize it somehow. Yeah, it's not easy.
But meanwhile, Simon, maybe we could start with, the rise of Brandenburg from an elector of the Holy Roman Empire to actually becoming its kingdom, and talk about the reign first of Frederick William of Prussia.
Yeah, so one important thing to remember right now is that at this time, Prussia is not a great power. They are at best considered a second-rate power at the beginning of the war, and before that, they are not really looked upon by most of Europe. They have just recently become a kingdom after the 30 Years' War, and there has very little really action been done there. So
yeah, and I think I'll just add, as the map will also show, it's kind of really a patchwork also of networks, because as you can see, most of it is here. You have the original Duchy of Prussia, but it's actually the family of the Hohenzollerns who've been ruling Brandenburg, that kind of are also the rulers of the land. This is just kind of strange borders, to say the least.
Yeah, because we have to remember the Kingdom of Prussia consists of Brandenburg and Prussia, which are these two regions that are split apart by Poland. And the kings are actually not allowed to use the word king of Prussia, but they have to use the word king in Prussia. Because if you see here, you see this region called West Prussia, which is a part of Poland, which they are not a king of. So they cannot even call themselves the kings of Prussia.
Yeah, and another, you can call it a complication to the relationship, is as an elector, Simon, maybe we could I'll also maybe just digress a little bit about the Holy Roman Empire. But the Elector of Brandenburg, which you can see here as a Margrave of Brandenburg, is one of the great electors of the Holy Roman Empire, which is what we know today as modern Germany and parts of Czechoslovakia, northern Italy and such. And it is the most complicated patchwork of territories with varying degrees of freedom and autonomy, ruled predominantly by the Habsburgs since the 1400s.
Yeah,
and it was the only empire if I'm not mistaken, where you kind of had these elections.
Well, there were a few instances of these elector councils, but it is the most prominent case of it. And yet this created sort of this patchwork where it's just chaos. Everybody has special rules for everything. You cannot walk 5 meters without crossing 2 countries, and everywhere there are different rules. Religions are split apart. You can travel from one village to the next one, and there could be completely different rules. And this all is sort of held together, or supposed to be held together, by the emperor, which have been now for a few centuries the Austrians, or the Habsburgs.
Yeah.
And in order for them to essentially keep their position, they have to convince the great electors to vote for them. And as you can guess, this comes with a lot of opportunities for these states or their rulers. And by opportunities, I mean a lot of bribes and money they can get in exchange for the votes.
Yeah, I think as you can see on this map, like at this top half here, this is actually the Margrave of Brandenburg, which actually used to be the elector of Swabia, which I think it transitioned in the 1300s to this region. Then you also have Saxony. Then you have what was Bohemia, which is in this light red here, but they kind of lost it later. And there's several archbishops as well that tend to have it. So you have the Archbishop of Trier, Mainz, and Cologne as well, that are also the various electors. Now, while you also did allude correctly about the amount of bribery that's involved to get the votes, it's also a case that within the realm of a prince elector, they have a lot more autonomy and a lot of influence in the imperial diet. So if you actually were to go back in the past, a lot of the Austrian wars with the Ottoman empires, to mobilize the main German responses, you could call it, it needed to go through the imperial diet and could not be just like the pure Austrian forces that would be mobilized under the Emperor of Austria itself. So it is a bit complicated, to say the very least.
Yeah, and
I
one
think
important
bribery
thing also is that is especially important for this war, that as the emperor, they couldn't really do too much against these electors, because if you have a bad relationship with one of the electors and you want to become the next emperor, then you have a bit of a problem.
Yeah, it's like one of your key 8 votes that are against you. 7 to 8, 7 to 9, depending on the era. And to your point, I just wanted to say about the bribery, I think the best example was the 1519 election between King Francis of France, who tossed in his name to kind of unite the Kingdom of France and the Holy Roman Empire, and Charles V, both tossing in their names, and the electors actually took the bribes of both the French king and Charles V, and they said to Francis of France, "Thank you very much," and all cast their vote unanimously for Charles.
Yeah.
But
that's the thing with bribes. You cannot guarantee that it will work.
But if you're accused of bribery, you can always bribe your way out.
Yeah.
So I think the reason we brought this up is this is Frederick the Great, Frederick William of Prussia, while he's the king in Prussia, is also an elector of the empire, and so would be his successors. And maybe you want to talk a little bit about the soldier king, and the relationship he had with his son, considering that is going to be the future Frederick the Great, one of the best commanders. I personally love that guy. So, Simon, maybe you want to talk about, I'll get a portrait of the soldier king.
Yeah, so the soldier king he, as the name suggests, really loved the army. He was just all in for the army. He expanded it massively, he modernized. There's even one story where one of the greatest treasures in Germany at the time was the Ivory Room, which was a room completely decked out in ivory. And Frederick William I just gave it to the Russians in exchange for like an enormous amount of extremely tall men for his army. Because he wanted to have
the grenadiers.
What do you mean?
I think they would have been for the grenadier divisions because grenadier units used to be the tallest guys of the armies.
Yeah, and he absolutely loved his tall man. But at the same time, there was only one thing he loved more than soldiers, and that was money. So because of that, despite modernizing and putting so much money into the army, he never went to war. And he lived really frugally. He didn't spend on anything, and just everything was put into the Prussian coffers to prepare for eventual war that would never come in his lifetime. But he was expecting a war constantly. And that's also why he put so much hopes into his son that he would become a great general and essentially lead his army into war and win many battles. So every single second, he wanted his son to get a military education. But
I think I'm just going to add one thing, Simon, is while the other electors and key nobles of the Holy Roman Empire this time actually spent all their money on these lavish palaces and feasts to kind of like show off their power, he actually was deploying everything into the the army. The courts were very frugal, like literally, like you would call them Spartan almost, right?
Yeah.
So with bare minimum furniture, cheap furnishings, and the man would also be actually hoarding supplies because at times when there were droughts and famines in his territory, he actually never even dispersed any grain from the royal stockpiles to the people.
Yeah.
Because it's like not worth it. But he was pretty disciplined in terms of that rigorous lifestyle that you said he tried to instill into his son, but did nearly cause the possible execution of young Frederick.
Yeah, there was a rather famous incident where, Frederick William was also a really bad father, to say the least. He frequently beat his kids, and it reached so much of violence and to such a bad point that Frederick II, or the future Frederick II, decided to flee Prussia together with his lover. Unfortunately, they were discovered, and the Soldier King was so angry that he nearly executed his son for desertion. But because he only had one male heir, and in the Holy Roman Empire, only men were allowed to inherit, not women, which will also come back later. And also because this story has kind of become internationally famous, sort of in a gossip way, where everybody knew that of that king, his son, he tried to flee. So all of the eyes were on this kid. So executing him wouldn't really have looked too well on and reflected well on him. So he chose a different option, a rather cruel one. It is said on the day that the execution was supposed to be held, he forced his son to the prison bars and forced him to look as his lover was executed in front of his eyes. It is said that he fainted right? before it happened.
But I think it kind of permanently did damage the relationship, and
I would say that makes sense.
Yeah.
The reason he actually wanted initially in his anger propose the execution of the young Frederick Frederick did desert technically in a military uniform, and he was holding an officer's rank in the Prussian army despite his tender age. I think he was 16
Yeah,
at this time, 16 or 17.
I
And
don't know exactly what age, but he could have
but
even been younger.
but yeah, he was officially did desert in his uniform, so that technically is an executionable offense, as we've seen in multiple conflicts even up to this date. And it is also the Holy Roman Emperor did not really want. He had already approved Frederick II as the heir designate of the Margrave of the kingdom in Prussia. And the advisor like, yeah, the emperor may probably just not give your house the next heir, might appoint someone else. So probably just best not to kill the young prince, which was probably I would say the reason that it did not go. But it did harden young Frederick,
Yeah, he
and he did.
really learned to hide all of his passions,
Yeah,
because
but
I think we talked a bit about the Soldier King. Now I think it would be a great time to talk about his son, or one of the most important figures for this, which is Frederick II, or Frederick the Great, as he will become known. The thing with him is that he was a great general, but he is like almost the embodiment of the Enlightenment ruler, or the enlightened tyrant, as some would call it. He really loved arts. He was a really smart guy. There's this famous story of him wanting the people in Prussia to plant potatoes. So he said to them, "Plant potatoes." But his citizens didn't want to do that. They didn't know what to do with potatoes, so they just ignored it. So he got a different approach. He declared the potato as a royal food, and all around the country he made farms for him and sent soldiers to guard them, but with specific orders to be bad at their jobs. So the people would sneak onto the fields, steal the potatoes from him, and plant them.
because it is shiny
So
and people are magpies.
yeah, I mean, those are royal. This is a royal food. It must be expensive. So if it's really valuable to steal them, and that is the reason why to this day in this region potatoes are absolutely loved. And he even himself published a cooking book for potatoes. He wrote an entire cooking book to give to his subjects, his personal one.
Damn. I mean, I'm pretty impressed. Like, can't imagine any ruler
that's
of
impressive.
Europe, actually in the world at that time, just like writing a cooking book for his subjects. But he was a patron of arts, literature, science, culture.
Yeah,
And I'll just say this: Prussia was a poor state, as you alluded to, Simon, when he took over beyond the war chest. By the time when he dies, Prussia is kind of like slightly above average in terms of its economic strength. It's nothing close to what France or Great Britain will be, or even Austria. But considering from where it was and where it went to, kudos to Frederick. But at this early age, he is only focused on one thing: war and writing his name into the annals of history. And I think this is where it starts to now get entangled with Austria. Yes, I think we need to talk about the pragmatic sanction first, because that is the backdrop. We mentioned that the Habsburg dynasty was the rulers of the Holy Roman Empire for most of their time. Problem is, as you alluded to, Simon, is what if I'm not mistaken, it's called the Salic law, where women are not allowed to inherit property, right, or titles, which would actually even impact, Queen Victoria in the future. But that's a different story. And Charles VI, who was the father of Maria Theresa and she was his only surviving adult child, passed a pragmatic sanction into saying that women can hold lands so that his daughter can stand. And this ended up causing quite a bit of problem for Europe, because a lot of people were pretty opportunistic, or holding on to the tradition that they got to stick together and control, like have the same law. And this
Yes,
is what you have is the War of the Austrian Succession. And I'm just sharing the belligerents on the map, where Austria, the Dutch Republic, Great Britain kind of fight off against France, Savoy, Naples, Sardinia, and Spain, who are backing actually the Bavarian Duke to be the next Holy Roman Emperor and not Maria Theresa. And this is where I would say Frederick the Great comes into the picture, because he joins the war initially on the coalition side, if I can use that term, but he doesn't give a shit about the pragmatic sanction.
yeah.
All
The
he cares
thing with
about is
the pragmatic sanction is this is not a law that changes the inheritance laws. That would be way too difficult to get through. It essentially says, for this one time, my daughter is allowed to inherit. Just this once.
exception rather than the norm.
Yeah. Yeah, and as you said, Frederick the Great, he didn't care who the Holy Roman Emperor was, but he had one important thing, and that was
The
a
vote.
claim on Silesia.
And also
And
the vote.
yeah, and Silesia is a rich province, so it's going to be really valuable if he is able to get his hands on that. And this is
1 second. I'm just trying to get the map of and this is, so if you were to see the map of Silesia, it's kind of like heading down. And for the audience's benefit, I would say this is one of the most industrialized areas of Europe. And currently this single province is actually responsible for I think 25% or so of all tax revenue in the Habsburg domain. It's very lucrative. But so Frederick does invade, and he is very opportunistic in the way he wants to go about the war. And his first battle of Molwitz was pretty a learning experience, to say the least, for the young king. Simon, would you briefly want to talk about that battle?
Yeah, of course. So essentially, this is at the very beginning of the war of the Austrian Succession. I'm not even sure if it has even really fully started yet, because the move on Silesia is one of the first things that happen. And the others, they are questioning Maria Theresa right now, but they are not really sure if they should go to war, because Austria is still really strong.
But Frederick is very strike now, react later.
Yeah. So the first thing that happens is kind of a maneuver where the two armies are positioned. The Prussians to the north and the Austrians to the south. But in the middle of the night, the Prussians essentially do a march around the formation, meaning that the Prussian front is now facing the Austrian back, which is a real problem, because normally you would want to have your best soldiers in the front and have all of the artillery correctly positioned, which are now reversed. So it's a lot more difficult to fight in that way. Then the first real engagement that happens is the cavalry maneuver on the right side of the Prussian army and the left side of the Austrians. So the Austrian cavalry charges the Prussian cavalry, and there's engagement. The Prussians are slowly pushed back. They lose more and more ground and are on the verge of routing. Frederick himself, together with his cavalry reserve, charges in and tries to save his flank. But despite him fighting valiantly and trying to stabilize it, he is unable to do so. And the flank breaks. And after that, Frederick flees the battlefield. Oftentimes it's said that his advisors tell him to do so because you do not want a dead king. That is an immediate disaster. And the war would have most likely devolved into chaos. So better for him to flee.
Just ended right away.
Yeah. And later, Frederick would say that this was one of the most embarrassing moments of his life, fleeing the battlefield. And he swore to himself that never again would he flee.
Though you got to give it, in this battle, it was basically Count Schwerin who commanded the infantry, who then just said, all right, now I'll show this guy how real soldiers fight. And as you alluded to at the start, Frederick William I, he might have spent his army training and never fought, but this is where the training took off, and the Prussian infantry was unleashed with its full power onto the Austrians, and it was completely stunning. Even the cavalry charges were dismantled. One Austrian soldier actually wrote that the way that these guys, stopped to fire, they thought that these guys are actually on a parade in peace and not on a battlefield. But this battle was a learning experience, and Frederick would continue this long journey, you could say, of training the Prussian cavalry, which was pretty bad at this time, to say the least, to at least become a usable asset in the battlefield for the years to come. And I think the First Silesian War does end pretty much in 1742. It was a pretty quick conflict, if you were to consider the number of years.
For the most part, it ends. There are still a few more battles. So first of all, there's a short ceasefire because, as mentioned before, Frederick the Great does not care about who gets to be emperor, and he still wants Austria to be powerful enough to defeat the other nations. So half a year they have a ceasefire. And in the summer, they start fighting again. And a few more battles are fought, and these are won by Frederick as well. And that is pretty much then the end of the First Silesian War.
Yeah, they have this Treaty of Berlin that was signed, which pretty much cedes most of Silesia to Prussia, which really pissed off the Austrians, to say the least, because this territory is gone. And more importantly, it was actually negotiated by the British, who were the primary allies of the Austrians. And, in return, the only terms was for Frederick to leave the anti-Habsburg coalition. Despite that loss of this pretty important province, Prussia did leave the alliance. And for a few years, they kept the peace. And that actually allowed Austria and Britain to gain a lot of ground against the opponents of theirs, which was led by France and Spain and Bavaria. And this would actually result in Frederick renewing hostilities and preemptively attacking Austria again, because, well, he was worried that they're becoming too powerful and they're going to renege on their promises.
I mean, Frederick is a smart guy. He pretty much knew that it was only a matter of time before another war would break out for them to recapture Silesia. So he thought better for him to attack them now while they are still at war with the others and prevent them from fighting him again or attacking him. So a preemptive strike, he thought, was his best option. And it turned out that he was correct.
Yeah, and what would actually happen was, I think one of his greatest victories also took place in this war, which was the Battle of Hohenfriedberg, which, if I'm not mistaken, is considered one of his greatest victories of all time, where he defeats a slightly larger Austrian and Saxon army, with him having a 3-to-1 favorable losses, ratio of casualties. And what ends up happening is there is a Treaty of Dresden that gets signed shortly after on Christmas Day 1745. And this predominantly just the terms is Frederick now acknowledges Maria Theresa's husband as the Holy Roman Emperor in return for Silesia. And Saxony just kind of got the short end of the stick where they were like, yeah, you also have to pay all your fines to Prussia for bothering them for all the trouble in the war.
And the thing is
Which-
also, Saxony also had a claim on Silesia. All three technically had a claim to Silesia. One of the reasons Frederick the Great attacked so early was because he wanted to get it before the Saxons could.
Oh, that makes really great sense, right? But ultimately, the first two Silesian wars are a great success for Prussia. Though people kind of don't trust Frederick anymore for diplomacy. But this is a nasty wound that Austria wants to avenge the loss of this very lucrative province. And it actually does set some goals into why Britain and Prussia start to get a bit closer, and why another power is now a bit worried about Prussia. Now, I think now we've set the stage, I think you would say, for Austria and Prussia, right? Because they are the two main players for the war, you could say. Next, one of the next major powers which is going to be participating in the European theater of operations is the Russian Empire. Now, Russia was considered a pretty the Tsardom of, I think was it called the Tsardom of Russia at this time? When the Kievan Rus started to reconquer everything. Because they had been in fights with the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth for centuries now. But Russia became what you could call a first-rate power during the reign of Peter the Great, who also moved the capital to St. Petersburg and beat Sweden in the Great Northern War as Russia expanded its influence towards the Baltic coast. He also dismantled that big the Russian hegemony and the boyars and everything. And it was through him that people now began to see Russia as a credible player in European politics. So this was the rise of the Empire of Russia. Now, Peter was more of an absolutist, kind of like how Louis XIV used to rule France. But there was a few succession crises for a few years after his death before you had Tsarina Anna kind of stabilize the regime. So that kind of gave a relatively more power back to the nobles after Peter had taken it away. Now, the reason Russia is monitoring Prussia in this situation is because of the buffer zone that they crave. So this is a map of Europe, in the aftermath of the War of Austrian Succession. As you can see, Sweden is really battered from this war, so they're not really much of a threat. And the Russian Empire wants to ensure that Poland remains as a buffer from the west. So they want to keep a lot of influence in Poland. And with the strength of Prussia rising in the aftermath of the Silesian Wars, because now all the powers in Europe have taken note of this small elector state that's suddenly become a relatively larger player. Let's just use that term. They decide to, something must be done because there's also the threat of this gap here of Prussia, which is under the King of Poland, for them to unify, and Russia wants to avoid it.
Hey guys, this is Craig from the Pacific War Channel. Please don't forget to check out my YouTube membership or my Patreon account over at www.patreon.com/The War Channel, where you can join the ranks and gain access to a hell of a lot of goodies. At the base minimum, you get access to the exclusive monthly podcast, early access to all of my content, voting rights for what subjects I will tackle next, and at higher tiers, I have much more goodies to come. So please click that link and check it out.
So you could say this was the only real reason Russia has an interest in joining the future conflict through diplomacy for now. Simon, is there anything you wanted to add to this? Or Greg?
One thing we have to remember about Poland is Poland at that time is, well, you can somewhat say that it's even a greater mess than the Holy Roman Empire. Because the parliamentary system of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth is, let's put it, a disaster. Imagine a parliament of a few hundred people where everybody gets a veto on any law. That's going to create a mess. And that was the parliamentary system of the Poland-Lithuanian Commonwealth. So they are very easy to manipulate, and that's one of the reasons they are so weak and easily controlled by Russia. And they were fully under the control of the Russians at the time.
Can I just say, now I don't want to really complain about the United Nations security permanent members of the Security Council, since it's only 5 vetoes versus what he described as like 700 vetoes. I don't know what you, Greg. I'll not complain about the UNSC anymore.
Yeah, that's a discrepancy.
And it's also interesting actually that the Elector of Saxony, who fought against Prussia during the Second Silesian War, is also the king of Poland at this time. So that's actually another reason he wanted Silesia also, for strategic purposes, is to kind of keep a continual border of his realms. Otherwise, he technically needs permission to go through, Frederick's lands to go to his kingdom. But yeah, so the main thing is Russia is concerned about Prussia's potential strength of gaining some control and influence over Poland. They have no intention, at least now, of really occupying, or like as we would see later down the lines. But they want to ensure that this realm is kind of like that proper buffer zone. It's kind of like how Rome and the Parthians and Sassanids kept fighting over the kingdom of Armenia for so long. You just want to keep the buffer. So this is the real reason why you could say the Russians are going to be interested in this war. And they are now much more stable as a nation, because in the aftermath of the devastation of the Golden Horde, and then when it was at its peak, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth held a good chunk of what we call as of the Russian Empire, even successfully invading them in the winter and holding on for several years, I might add.
Yeah, during the Great Ivan War, where a guy keeps coming back, died like 5 times.
So he just lost all his lives finally. I guess gamers do finally have a respawn limit. But yeah, and it's actually kind of sad because the once mighty Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, because I know we all did actually that episode of Grunwald where Poland and Lithuania united to smash the Teutonic Order, permanently crippled it. And this is actually, you could say, like the last 40 years of this realm, because after this there'll be like a series of partitions between the Austrians, Russians, and Prussians to just literally take up the territory. So yeah, it's kind of sad demise for a mighty realm. And I think now that's covered 3 of the 5 major combatants of the war. I think, Craig, maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about the 2 largest powers in the world at this time.
Yeah, so obviously we're talking about Great Britain and France, and I guess you would say they're 2 of the, not the most significant, but pretty significant players in this conflict, and do pitch in whenever you can. Definitely not my specialization, especially when it comes to things like the Middle Ages, for example. But Britain and France are obviously, by the point of the 7 Years' War, rivals. And I mean, their antagonism dates back to the Middle Ages, and it includes many conflicts like the 100 Years' War, which I think everybody kind of has somewhat knowledge of.
Actually say a little bit, going back to the Norman conquest, because that's actually what ultimately tied the 2 countries with a history.
An inevitable rivalry because, both sides would see it fit that there's one ruler who's ruling both of them together, but it has never. Well, I mean, it's happened now and then, but it's still an ongoing conflict, and it intensifies a lot more during the age of exploration. So by the 1700s, both nations are emerging as leading maritime powers, and they're competing for what is in becoming a global trade network. And the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713 ends the War of Spanish Succession, which redistributes the colonial holdings, but it leaves a lot of unresolved grudges. So, for example, and I'm going to pull up actually a different map of America here. One of the biggest issues here is after this treaty, France cedes Acadia, which is Nova Scotia today, to Britain, which is basically the nail in the coffin of Nouvelle France, because if you hold Newfoundland, you can basically just screw up all the naval traffic into what is
it that area where it says Port Royal and Arcade, like that area? Because part of my Canadian geography.
Let me zoom in a bit. Well, that didn't zoom in too much. So northeast, you have Newfoundland, which is in the purple over here. Port Royal over here is part of that deal. Controlling this, as you can see, the St. Lawrence, which is the river that goes into Canada of Quebec, which is at this point the lifeblood of Nouvelle France altogether. There's no other ports that the French can use to get anything in. They're at the mercy of the British, more or less. Like, this really is kind of the end of what was the experiment of Nouvelle France. I'll get into it a little bit in a bit, actually. Talk about this. So the rivalry, definitely, it's escalating through economic warfare, as well as the ongoing political issues of the day.
Yeah, I just wanted to just show this map because this is going to be like the sides during the upcoming war, and
globally, yeah.
You could just say that most of the possessions which are not in Europe, it's just pretty much belonging to Britain or France.
Don't forget the Portuguese.
Yeah, that's why you have that's why you have Brazil.
They will never break their alliance with Great Britain.
Yeah,
if I'm not mistaken, it's still like the longest standing alliance, right?
It is. And it had a lot of impact in World War II. Very sneaky stuff there. In Europe, they clash over, of course, all the alliance systems, everything that's going on, all the crises, the succession movements, and all that. So, as we just spoke about, there was the War of the Austrian Succession. That was a significant hurdle. And France supported Prussia against Austria, who was backed by Britain. So inevitably, all the players kind of get involved somewhat in these conflicts. Overseas, competition is really turning towards North America and India, where there's informal skirmishes I'll kind of get into later between, in French, the Cleux de Bois, the great traders that are going around with the Aborigines, and they're it's heightening a lot of suspicions. It's not a full-blown war, but the colonies and Nouvelle France are always kind of battling each other in one way or another. Britain's growing naval supremacy is very much challenging France's ambitions, making conflict is inevitable. And I mean, both of these nations are pretty used to just building up to a nice war between each other. So whenever there's something that's going on that's a bit more global, they're getting ready to attack each other. Now, I'm pretty sure you can talk a lot more about this than me, Gareth, but I'll talk a little bit about the kings. So let me just bring up the portrait.
But I would just also say one thing. Currently, Britain and Austria are allied. Mm-hmm. Prussia, and it has been a much longer standing alliance than what Prussia has with France at this moment. And the only reason Britain is now kind of like not happy with Austria is because of this man, King George II. The reason I say that, he is part of the dynasty which we call the Hanoverian Kings of Britain, because they have the Duchy of Hanover as a personal fief, and they want to protect it. And Britain, seeing Austria get its ass whooped by Frederick the Great, to say the least, they are not really confident about Austria protecting their their continental holdings.
Yeah. So obviously, King George II, like you said, he's fearing French attacks on Hanover, and this is pushing them more in the orbit. with his ally there, and of course the Prussians under Frederick the Great are getting involved. George II, he's trying to support a strategy that's combining the fighting in France and Europe, but also trying to get involved with the other colonial possessions where they can hit, France on an unequal level. So obviously, one of the best ways to do this is to attack Nouvelle France, because the French will not be able to bring over many units to protect their holdings over there, as well as what's actually a lot more crucial is the Caribbean holdings, which is by far a lot more financially beneficial to Nouvelle France than where I currently live, since they gave us up for a bunch of Caribbean islands.
Well, so I guess they still don't accept your French, right?
I am not. If you asked anyone here, no, they'd have some bad words about me being an Anglophone. So yeah, it's my second language, French, by the way, not my first. And there'll also be a lot of fighting over India, which
Yeah,
we'll be talking about in another episode. I'm very excited to hear about that because I'm ignorant to that conflict.
To be fair, even I'm pretty ignorant. I've not studied that since like sixth grade. So it's going to be a lot of research for that. But yeah, while they don't actually have a lot of actual area on the subcontinent at this point, both the French and British East India companies, which are now backed by their governments, they have a lot more financial entanglements and influence.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is just a thing that we need to consider is the territory numbers will be very small in India, but they're not going, but it's still going to be a significant development.
Financially, it's a huge one because we all know about the history of the Hudson Bay Company and what's going to be coming about in the next few hundred years and stuff. It's going to be definitely a large part of the puzzle here. And on the other side, of course, we have Louis XIV of France, who's, very engaged
15th.
Oh, 15, excuse me. He's very engaged.
Sun King is dead. We are all happy for that.
Yeah. He's very engaged in the political scene and driving his nation forward. He's really taking a iron fist role in that. So as you can imagine, his reign is marked by, a reliance on the advisors, his generals. There's a lot of internal problems and a lot of financial strain at this time, because I guess you could say France is kind of stretched pretty thin with its holdings, because unlike Britain, it doesn't have the proper naval force nor populations in its colonial holdings to actually properly conduct itself, which is going to come to be shown soon. He's going to be entering the war primarily to counter, Britain, and particularly Britain's naval hold over, their colonies. He's on, the side with Austria and Spain, hoping to defeat Britain and Prussia, but I don't want to get into the 7 Years' War itself, but France is going to certainly have a lot of problems. Gaurav, do you have anything to say about the king's role in all this?
Yeah. So Britain, it's not really much because Britain is still, they have been a parliamentary democracy for quite a while. So the king does have say, and kind of got to give it to King George II. At least he still was the last British monarch to be in an active combat zone, like, with the armies, which was at the Battle of Dettingen which was a miraculous victory, you could say the least, for the anti-Austrian alliance in that war, because the French, even despite being pretty outnumbered, nearly won. Louis, he did join the War of Austrian Succession just because of, he just did not want Salic law, and also France would take any opportunity it got to screw over the Habsburgs, which is precisely why they just joined the 30 Years' War in the first place.
But I mean, the second half of the 30 Years' War was just, well, guess everybody is fighting the Habsburgs.
Yeah. And he was, like his predecessor, Louis XIV, an absolutist, Louis XV, especially when some of his key ministers actually died of natural causes. He did not have like that, you could call it absolute level of control that Louis XIV did have over the government. That I got to give it to the 14th. There's no point calling Louis because there was a taxation proposed to kind of pay off the heavy debts that they incurred during the War of Austrian Succession, because that bankrupted France as usual, right? Because wars are pretty bad on your economy. The bond purchase, which was to give a 5% interest and pay off a 36 million franc debt, because 36 million was humongous at the time. It was overwhelmingly rejected by the clergy and the first estate of France. But the main consideration is how they approach their foreign policy for this upcoming war. France would actually not send much control or support to any of its colonial forces in North America or India. They're on their own. If they can recruit locals and everything to fight for them, brilliant. But they are not going to get any support from the home country.
Could I actually explain a little bit about their colonial holdings before you get into that?
Sure. Please go ahead.
And I also just want to bring up that this period of time it involves the balance of power theory, which is going to be, I guess, afterwards it's a little bit more obvious, but basically this is kind of an understanding amongst the great rulers of the great powers that no one wants anyone to hold an absolute monopoly over the power scene in Europe. So in general, when these conflicts come about, most of the larger nations will either band together to take down whoever's the biggest dog, in the fight. So, for example, taking down the Spanish was a thing that was going on for quite a long time. So that's still present in all of this. But as for the composition,
it will even go through in the Napoleonic era.
Yeah, of course.
Because before the Battle of Leipzig, Clemens von Metternich, when he met Napoleon before Austria did join the Sixth Coalition, did want to weaken France, but was willing to offer the deal that Napoleon still remains the emperor, since a relatively stronger France would be a great support to Austria and Britain if they have to go up against the Russian armies.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even in the ancient times, that was also a case. You had the Diadochi Wars,
Mm-hmm.
and in the aftermath, if one of Macedon or the Seleucids or Ptolemaic Egypt became very powerful, the other two would kind of gang up and say that, all right, let's beat him and return to the status quo.
Yeah. But by the 18th century, Britain's empire is a patchwork of settler colonies and trading posts built through the British East India Company and other royal charters. So in North America, as you can see on this map, most of my audience is American, so I'll just regurgitate this quickly. It's the 13 Atlantic colonies, from Massachusetts to Georgia. Plus, they also now have parts of Newfoundland and the Hudson's Bay territories. And that's looking into the fur trade, which by this point is kind of calming down, but it was very lucrative at the beginning. The Caribbean featured very, very lucrative sugar-rich islands like Jamaica and Barbados. In Asia, Britain held coastal footholds in India, so you have Bombay, Madras, Calcutta. And trading rights in China are beginning there. African outposts supported, obviously it's the slave trade, while possessions like Gibraltar and, Minorca are securing some access in the Mediterranean. So basically what we think of as like the pinnacle of the British Empire, it's starting to form. And the empire spans, I think, 1.5 million square miles loosely. It's not really like, they're not protecting it per se, but it's by a trade basis, it's that big. You have something to say, Joe?
Yeah, I was just going to talk about like their doctrine of how France wanted to approach the war. They are not going to send any help to the colonies, as I mentioned. They're on their own. Colonies can recruit and try to get locals or mercenaries to join them, but they are not going to get any major help from the Kingdom of France or the King in Europe.
Well, I'm talking about Britain right now, but I was going to get to France.
Oh, okay, fair. Just continue that. Sorry, I'll get to their foreign policy of both after that.
Yeah. So for Nouvelle France, it's unlike the 13 colonies for Britain. There's very, very small population. It's actually embarrassing. but it does cover 3 million square miles. So Nouvelle-France encompasses what you can see here on the map that's in the blue, but honestly, not really. They're like, for example, everything you see in the Louisiana areas, there's almost no one really there. They're just outposts. So what you think of as modern day Canada,
which Napoleon would sell.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So the area around Quebec and the Great Lakes is basically where the people are. The Louisiana Territory, so that's the Mississippi Valley and the Rockies. There's very, very few people there. And it's built off of the fur trading network. And more or less it's being defended by the indigenous populations who are working in collaboration with the French, more so than the British, where it's a little heavier handed. The Caribbeans for Nouvelle-France, which includes Saint Domingue, which is Haiti today, Martinique, Guadeloupe. This is sugar and coffee rich. It's extremely lucrative. It's so lucrative, they will give up Quebec straight away for it later. In India, France controls ports like Pondicherry and Chantenagua and they also have
I've
African
actually never
holdings.
visited Pondicherry.
Oh yeah, okay.
The British, it's actually funny. Except for Calcutta, I've pretty much lived mostly in the former British capitals of India.
And they do have some African holdings. So, of course, there's Senegal, Guinea, facilitating the slave trade. There's islands in the Indian Ocean as well, Mauritius, which I wasn't aware of that one, serving as naval bases, but I don't think it's anything that could really threaten the British. France, historically, it's integrated into the Catholic missionary network, which is kind of their means of trying to centralize control. It's very loose. And that's pretty much all I can think of as far as the two empires concerned. And I just want to reiterate, Nouvelle-France is I think maybe a tenth the population of the 13 colonies. So what you see here on this map is kind of very misleading, to say the least.
They have more area but less people.
In the Louisiana Territory, it's literally a bunch of drunk fur traders with some natives at an outpost. That's it. There's nothing else.
Okay. Just getting back to the map here. The reason France is not going to send any support is there is actually a genuine necessity for them to maintain a large army in Europe. France does have pretty large boundaries that they need to go protect, which is why they are going to concentrate. And the idea is the French army on the European continent is going to do a bang up job. They're going to go through, they're going to smash the Prussians, they're going to smash the British who would be at Hanover. All the gains that they're going to make on the continent are going to be bartered away. And they just hope that their colonial possessions can hold off or not lose too much so that France can kind of make a net gain at least. It's predominantly their strategy and thinking. And it's actually a bit surprising they do lose in North America, if you ask me, given how many of the Native American tribes actually supported the French over the British. I think,
unfortunately, not to give it away, there's a very specific tribe that formed a confederacy. I ironically work for this tribe today. I work on a native reserve. They loved playing both sides, and the British paid them more in the end. That's what happened.
I think Frederick William of Prussia would be really proud to hear that.
Back again to bribery.
But the thing, right? That concept of bribing away the mercenaries always works. But yes, this is the strategy of France. And while you did correctly mention, right now the three most powerful navies in the world, you could say, are Britain, and then France and Spain are sort of a bit equal at this moment. But Britain is the clear number one. But it's not as big of a gap we will see that Britain will have in the 19th century. And France knows that they are not going to be able to blockade run or stop the British. So there's no point even trying to risk sending in these convoys of supplies and troops, because Great Britain will either sink it or liberate it for their own use. And this concept was not a new thing. They have been using it for a few decades, France, though it's not really good. Well, it would serve them well. They're going to lose pretty much a lot of their colonial possessions. And their plans in Europe, devised by Louis XV, was a system of diplomacy, and it actually caused a lot of problems in the French court. France is going to publicly state something with the ministers, support of, what are their ambitions, what they're going to do, right? Every country needs to do that. And Louis goes behind his ministry's back and has an entire network of agents trying to put through his own ideas, which kind of contradict what he's publicly stating. And while you did allude to correctly the balance of power, the idea of Louis here is he's going to be like the shadow puppeteer. On paper and for the most of the world to see, Louis is keeping that balance of power, but he is going to be pulling the strings in many other duchies if he got his way through. And I think one of the greatest ideas he had was actually get his kinsman, one of his family members, Louis Francois de Bourbon, the Prince of Conti, to be to the maintenance to get the Polish crown. So yeah, he wants an ally there, and this is literally what 40 years after the Habsburg reign in Spain ended, and the Bourbons took over. And he does want to also open alliances with the Ottomans and Sweden as well, mostly to oppose the Russians. So he does right now think Russia is his biggest threat to come in the future. And Britain, just given its geography, they're not going to commit troops to the continent. If I'm not mistaken, I think the only time Britain ever agreed to a major concentration of troops was only during World War I and II on the European mainland. I'm probably just going to give this away. In the 7 Years' War, Britain's contingent of soldiers that fought on the continent would be about 25 to 30,000 at most. When we discuss later the size of the total forces mobilized, you would realize that it's a really pathetic number. Britain's strategy is going to be focused on its senior service, the Royal Navy. They're blockading French ports, they are attacking French merchant shipping, and they are actively sending a lot of aid to their colonies. Which I think, Craig, you might know this a bit better. They do send in good amount of reinforcements to North America, for example, which I think one was led by, General James Wolfe when he captured Quebec.
When Wolfe comes in, the France doesn't leave Nouvelle-France without officership, but unfortunately they end up sending, I won't get into too much, but Montcalm. And Montcalm is a pretentious asshole who wouldn't use what was called the guerrilla fighters, whether they be Aborigines or the Quebecois. Well, yeah. Wolfe had more numbers, inherited actually a better situation because Nouvelle-France actually was winning early on, but they were under a Prussian general who was a mercenary, who was actually just very, very good. But yeah, as soon as a French officer came over, he actually just doomed everything.
I think I could see Simon in the back saying, yes, France only was good when they had Germans leading them.
It's 100% true.
Russians carrying every team.
Yeah.
Well, one of the other greatest French commanders fought valiantly for the Holy Roman Empire, Prince Eugene. But yes, just getting back to Britain's strategy, they are going to focus on blockades. And the main thing on the continent is to protect the Duchy of Hanover, since that's a direct possession of the king. They're not going to give that up. So they will be convinced by Prussia. And ultimately, their strategy is just to find a continental partner and give them, send them money, supplies, and everything. It's kind of what Britain did again in the War of the Sixth Coalition. They did not send much troops, but they certainly outfitted the coalition armies. And Britain would subsidize almost a quarter of Frederick the Great's upcoming war. So that is a good chunk of money that is coming his way. And now this brings us to what we can call the diplomatic revolution, which was a grand changing of the alliances. And in this, just going to get a different map up, is the aftermath of the various, in the War of Austrian Succession, how the alliances changed. And the biggest change, obviously, is Austria is no longer allied with Britain, and Prussia is now no longer allied with France. They just kind of switched their alliances over. The reason why people are ganging up on Prussia on the continent is Frederick's aggression, to say the least.
Yeah,
The way he.
this will come up several
Yes.
times, and in the next episode we do on Europe, it's gonna be really clear why they gang up on him.
In the let's not get ourselves in the previous two Silesian wars. Frederick really did not really conduct himself as an ally, and preemptive striking is never really good, especially if you do it in 2 consecutive wars. It's not good PR.
Yeah, and a bit of foreshadowing, it's not better when you do it 3 times.
Yeah. As we mentioned, Russia's main goal is to have the influence in Poland, and they are threatened by the Prussian strength for that region. France is pretty disgusted with the way Frederick was treating them, leaving an alliance with them, joining the Austrians through a non-aggression pact and ceasefire, then breaking the alliance again, joining them, and then breaking it again. You kind of don't want to work with this guy. And from their vantage point, I definitely understand that. Austria, no doubt, has the biggest grudge. They want Silesia back, and they want to humiliate Frederick for what he did for provoking them twice. And Britain decides to use Prussia as its continental ally so that it can combat France. It's a bit easier also for them to supply. Prussia is closer to Hanover, so maybe they can better protect the king's territory. And this leads to the several treaties that happen in the lead up to the 7 Years' War. The first is called the Anglo-Prussian Alliance of 1756, which surpasses the 1731 alliance that Britain did have with Austria, which is the Anglo-Austrian Alliance. It was first actually called it's officially also called the Treaty of Westminster, which was a treaty of neutrality that was initially signed on 16th January 1756. And in this treaty, it was signed between King George II and Frederick the Great to protect Hanover because the British feared a French attack would come through. And the terms stated that Prussia and Great Britain would seek to prevent any foreign powers' forces from passing through the Holy Roman Empire, and was part of the diplomatic revolution as well. The problem for the British is they wanted to avoid a war on the continent so that they can focus their economy onto, their colonies and trade. But unfortunately, they allied with Frederick II of Prussia, now called Frederick the Great, who decided to open the war with a preemptive strike again. I'm not going to say who, we are just going to let it pass. And this involves retaliation that they were holding their own, so Britain decides to commit forces to just defend Hanover and supply Russia. But this would be the main terms of this alliance between Britain and Prussia. And with the Austrians and French, you have... All right, before I get this, I just want to ask you guys a question. What was the name of the treaty between the French and Austrians? It's a very famous name.
You mean the Treaty of Paris or what?
You're close. No, you're close to the area. The Treaty of blank.
It's near France. I mean, near Paris.
Yeah. It's a very famous name. We've referenced that name and before.
I actually don't know.
Simon, you want to try? You were pretty close.
I had
It's
to
an
say
area. It's
Paris because half of the treaties with France are named Paris.
Well, I'll just say it's a region right by Paris, full of where there was a coronation for a German monarch.
Okay, so it's gonna be Treaty of Versailles.
Yep, there were 2 treaties of Versailles that were signed.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to make a play on that name since we always know the World War One aftermath.
Yes, of course.
The first treaty, which was signed in 1756, was a mutual assistance pact if either were to be attacked by Great Britain or Prussia in the next 30 years. The first treaty is just that much between the French and Austrians. The second treaty, which was signed a year later, and this was actually signed during the 7 Years' War. Since we're not going to get time to dwell into some of the smaller diplomatic concerns, especially in the first years of the war, I'm just bringing it up here. The second treaty would say that France will agree to assist Austria in regaining Silesia from Prussia in exchange for Austria to cede the Austrian Netherlands. So that would be like, your Belgium today. Or is it Netherlands?
No, Netherlands are already free after the 30 Years' War.
Yeah. So it would have been what we know as Belgium today that time. Not mistaken, Belgium's monarchy doesn't come into play yet. I don't think they're sovereign. But yeah, it is the Austrian Netherlands, which is it's kind of like near Burgundy. And this was like kind of playing into both sides' long-term goals of territories they wanted to recover. And in the wake of the treaty, the French would actually occupy certain troops to free up the Austrian garrisons. And the French would actually want to end up putting Bourbon here in the future to head, so that, well, lo and behold, balance of power doesn't really mean much to Louis XV as long as he holds all the power. This is not directly tied to this episode, but what I want to also talk about is the evolution of the war. I'm sorry, before I get that, both of these alliances are gonna crumble in the aftermath of the war, not long-term alliances. So Portugal, be happy you still maintain your 800-year alliance. And I think what was very interesting is the scope of war that's about to be unleashed on you. Armies are gonna get enlarged significantly. Early wars in the 30 Years' War in the mid 17th century. Battle of Brighton-Fell was the first Battle of Brighton-Fell was one of the largest engagements, and that had slightly over 70,000 troops on both sides, and were pretty large armies for both. Even though it also included 18,000 raw Saxon soldiers as well.
And
by 1700, organizations and logistics have improved so much. Louis XIV, in the wars at the turn of during the War of Spanish Succession, France was actually maintaining over 500,000 soldiers in the field for extended periods of time. Considering in the Italian wars, they would literally be bankrupt in 3-4 months of campaigning when they raise an army of around 35,000 men. It's a pretty significant development. Simon, sorry, you were saying something?
Yeah, and we also have to keep in mind, I don't know if you have that also, these are not, in the 30 Years' War, what the troops that fought were mercenaries. Basically, everything was mercenaries. In this war, a lot of the troops are professional soldiers, especially in the European theater, where for the Prussians, they barely used any mercenaries. It's really nearly everything as professional, trained soldiers of the Prussian army.
Yeah, and I'm actually just adding to that. As you mentioned, mercenaries, and if mercenaries are not going to be paid, they are going to go on a rampage. For example, in the 30 Years' War, you had that sack of Magdeburg, which really dented the prestige of the Catholic cause by the brutality of that sack, for example. Here, as you mentioned, because they are more citizen soldiers, you could call it, for lack of a better term, there are more rules so that this kind of slaughtering and looting of civilian bodies is actually minimized, which is why the battlefield losses were probably higher, in terms of casualties over the war, but the overall death toll, if we compare it to the 30 Years' War, was
Well,
significantly lower for the civilians.
To be fair, 30 Years' War was a massacre for civilians. I mean,
True.
like a third of
But
Germany
monks-
just died. People thought the apocalypse was happening.
Can't blame them also, but yeah, there are now rules of conduct. And another thing is actually supply trains have now come into place. Armies are now significantly larger, and they are literally too large now for the concentrated forces to feed off the land and move through different villages as they move through and get supplied from them. It's practically impossible, and they also know that. That's why you have these slow moving supply trains from centralized depots that are going to be accompanying the army, and that's going to be their primary lines of supply and retreat, which slows down the army but keeps them concentrated. And that also leads to the fear of commanders for actually wanting to commit their forces into battle, because people are always kind of scared. And this is a very long historical trend of commanders not wanting to really engage into battle most of the time. They just rather psychologically win or skirmish. And that's been a case like since the Norman times till date for most commanders, except if you're very aggressive like Alexander the Great or Frederick II, who have they're not reckless, but they are not afraid to get into the scrap of a battle. And I think this slow moving supplies is actually what will make Napoleon implement the core system later on, since it increases his speed of movement. But yeah, I think now the scene is set. The great diplomatic revolution has taken place. The countries of Europe are the great powers of Europe, rather. They are on the warpath. They have old grudges or recent grudges, imperial ambitions that need to be settled, and we are going to see the start of World War Zero, as some people like to call it.
Indeed. But before we let the audience go, please, if you haven't already done so, check us out on YouTube, because we're putting up a lot of maps that's going to help with a lot of the geography for this. I know, not to knock on Americans, but like 80% of my audience is American, and I wouldn't be surprised if you don't know where Prussia is or something. So it'll help out if you have some maps on hand for all the various battles we're going to be covering. And please, if you'd like to further support the channel, you can check out the YouTube membership or the Patreon account at www.patreon.com/PacificWar channel. Over there, you get access to the exclusive podcast series. There's about 32 episodes and ongoing. One's uploaded every month. The last one, which was voted on by everybody, which I was surprised that it won the poll, was on the Siberian intervention. So that just came out. It's an interesting one. It's kind of from the Japanese perspective, because they're kind of the villains in it, and it's fun to talk about all the shit that they did. And you also get access to all of the content I make early, about 2 weeks in advance, and you get to vote in these fantastic polls. Probably about 2 weeks from now will be another poll up. Thank you, Simon, for being the guest on this, and we'll be joined by you soon as we delve into the 7 Years' War, or we'll call it World War Zero here.
Yeah,
even though I think the Russo-Japanese War is World War Zero and whatever.
Thank you for inviting me again.
By chronologically.
I know. Yeah, until next time.